Good morning and welcome. My name is John Hoyt. I am the Solutions Consultant here at TMC. This is the first webinar in our 2015 webinar series. We're going to be looking at the year-end close procedure, and specifically as the reference, we're going to be looking at Dynamics GP 2013. There are 3 versions currently supported by Microsoft for this year-end close: GP 2010, GP 2013 in its various release forms, and GP 2015 if anybody had been an early adopter for that new version of it. The material applied, or that I'm going to discuss, will apply to all 3 versions. I'm going to go over kind of what's called the starter view, or the standard view of year-end close. As part of the webinar series today, I've got some downloads that we're going to be sending out, and I apologize I was not able to get them up on the GoToMeeting where you can download them yourself right now. But if you would send an email with the request to either Jim or to myself, we'd be happy to send you all 3 of the documents that I've referenced here. I have a detailed step-by-step guide for the year-end close process. It takes you through all of the different steps and procedures in very good detail. I have put together a little quick document that's a screenshot reference. We talk in the year-end close process, for example, about how do I make a backup. I'm going to make lots of backups as we go through year-end close. If you're not someone who does that regularly, you may not be familiar with where that's done. It's all done inside GP. I'm going to go through those steps today in the webinar, but it's also included in that screenshot reference, how to get to the various places that are mentioned in the step-by-step guide. And then finally, Microsoft has just released a What's New in Year-End Close 2014 PowerPoint. And I'm going to make a copy of that available to everyone as well. With that, you'll be able to go through and see what has changed and what has not changed, specifically for the year 2014 and opening up the year 2015. So again, all of those are available. We'll send those out to anybody that requests them. We'll also make a posting of this recording available. That should take a couple of days to get that up on the website, and then you have that available as a reference as well. In the guide that I created, as I said, it is pretty extensive. There are something like close to 50 pages in total between the different module groups that need to be closed and in the proper sequence. I also have at the end some general questions that are asked frequently, appendix that list all the different values that get updated at the customer level, the vendor level, what happens in Smart List, etc. The reference guide, the screenshots, again, just things like if you have never gone through and created a SQL Server database backup, you can do it inside GP. You get to it from the GP button, go to Maintenance, go to Backup. It will then ask you, where do you want to create that? So you're going to need to make sure that whatever computer you're working from, if you're doing it from your workstation or you're doing it directly at the server, just make sure there's enough available disk space. You want roughly about 3 times as much available disk space as you have for the size of your database. That is, if I have a 1 gigabyte database, the computer I'm doing the year-end close on should have at least 3 gigabytes of free data space available somewhere, because I'm going to be making multiple backups. I didn't count, but I think it's probably something close to 15 total by the time you finish the process. There are a couple preliminaries that you want to make sure you go through before you get started. First and foremost, make a backup. Like I said, you're going to hear me say that a lot over the course of this webinar because it is a very common activity in year-end close. In your fiscal period setup window that's accessed under the GP homepage, or rather under the financials, you want to make sure that you have the next year already open if that's not been done yet. So 2015 needs to be created, and the periods within that for the different module groups need to be set the way you want. You can, if you choose to, at this point run a subledger to general ledger reconciliation. That was a feature that was released in GP 2013 and extended in R2, but it allows me to do a quick comparison between, say, my payable subledger and my GL account balances, identify where I may have some reconciliation issues, get those resolved. And finally, you may choose to build for yourself a report group. That report group is going to be used to run the before and after comparison. You might want to include things like a trial balance report, stock count reports, aging reports, etc. Just something that we can use to make sure that as we go through the year-end close process, close 2014, open 2015, all of my balances are rolling forward in the manner that I expect them to. One last note before we jump into the overview. Payroll should have already been done. Payroll is always performed at calendar year end. It's independent of your fiscal year end close procedures. Has to do with getting the tax tables updated. We don't have a lot of people that are using GP's payroll, but if you have any questions about that before you get started, I would strongly suggest reaching out to Julie London or to your project manager and get some input on the payroll side. So for the year-end close process itself, to summarize, I'm going to go through these 6 modules, and they need to be going through in this specific sequence. So start with inventory, get everything closed in inventory, then receivables, then payables, etc. Finally, the last piece in the true year-end close is at the general ledger level, and that will update all of those balances. As we go through each one of the individual module groups, both here in the summary slides as well as in my step-by-step guide, you're going to go through specific steps within each module. So for inventory, we're going to want to make sure we have all of our unposted and open transactions, any adjustments that are, any transfers that are in process, etc. Get everything completed that has a 2014 date. I then want to go through and reconcile my quantities, complete a physical count if necessary, print that inventory-specific report group, that's my starting point, then make a backup of the entire GP database. And then we go through the actual close the year process, and that is a routine that's done from the routines palette inside GP. So to illustrate that real quickly, let me switch over to my GP system, and I'm going to pull up my inventory page. And this applies for inventory, but it applies for all the other groups inside GP as well. From my routines palette is where I'm going to access my year-end close functionality. And this is in place for each one of the modules. So as I go through my steps in sequence, I close inventory first, then I would do the next step. Ultimately, I go through purchasing, receivables, etc. But each module or each sub-ledger needs to go through the year-end close process first. In the case of inventory, there are specific questions. What do I want to do with discontinued items? What about lot attributes if I'm tracking any of my items by lot, etc.? Once I have all my decisions made, then I can go through and click the process. This will go through and do the year-end close process at the inventory sub-ledger level. If I switch back over to my slide deck, having closed the year at the inventory level, I can now go into the 2014 fiscal periods window and make sure inventory is closed all the way through. And again, just to illustrate that, from my financial page, I need to get into my setup. Sorry, I've lost my place. Now, I'm not going to dig around looking for it. The fiscal close window, I've got that illustrated in my reference guide, but make sure all of inventory is closed for 2014. And as an illustration, inside that step-by-step guide that I've created and send out for you, there is again a recap of all the steps that I'm going to go through at the inventory level, all 8 of those steps, and then detailed descriptions of what to do for each one of those. Again, if you just send an email to me or Jim, and I'll put those email addresses up one more time at the end for everybody if you didn't get a chance to write them down previously, then just send us that request. We'll send you out all these documents. After inventory, next step in the process is going to be receivables. And just like I did in inventory, post all my transactions. This is going to be both that receivables management and those other modules that feed into receivables. So sales order processing, if you're using that module, or the GP invoicing module, if you're using that one. Get all my 2014 transactions posted, make a backup of the database, and then just like I went through before, I want to close the year. I want to close the fiscal periods. There's an option to close that tax year for sales tax calculations. Go ahead and close that as well. And once all of those close successfully, make another backup. In the step-by-step guide I talked about is an appendix for smart list objects and for others. This is just a quick listing for your information about what is getting updated in the background, in the database itself. If I looked into the table that holds customer summary information, for example, all of the values that you see here are going to be updated either at fiscal year end or at calendar year end, and it's going to simply roll balances forward. So my year-to-date values get reset to 0, last year gets updated, life-to-date gets updated, etc. Moving on to payables, a little more steps involved here because with payables I now have the introduction of 1099 year-end close process steps as well. So again, I'll post all my open transactions, print my reports, install the payroll year-end update if you're using that. That's optional. And there are links to get that update in the materials that we'll be sending out to everyone. Now I go through my 1099 information. 1099 backup is done. Verify all the 1099 information as it exists is accurate. Print all my 1099 statements. Make another backup. And now I can actually go through and close out the payables module in its entirety. Some of the examples of those frequently asked questions that are in the step-by-step guide. In this case, an example of what happens to my inactive vendor records during year-end closeout. That's one of the choices you'll be asked to make as you process the payables module. Well, what are the inputs? What are the outputs? What happens? Those are explained inside the frequently asked questions. There are about 20 or so of those in total, and they cover all of the major module groups. So a great reference, what is the impact of what I'm about to do? On the fixed asset side, I again need to make sure I've got payables closed first because of the linkage between both payables management and fixed assets if you have that enabled. So I don't want any new payables transactions trying to create fixed asset records at this point. Complete all of my fixed asset transactions, any retirements, any transfers, any adjustments to valuation. I need to go through and run my depreciation steps for all the assets through the year end. And that can include, of course, the internal book, and I can now ask the internal book to calculate and generate my GL journal entry posting for my accumulated depreciation and amortization, whatever's not yet been recognized. Run my year-end reports, make sure that within the fixed assets module itself that I have the fixed assets calendar and the new fiscal quarters set up if there's any changes made to the fiscal quarters. Make my backup, close out the year at the fixed asset level, and then again make a final backup once it's closed out successfully. A quick note, you'll see these throughout the guide that's been provided. If there's something specific in a module that needs to be called out, in this case details around the depreciation basis, then I'm going to make those notes available. You can see again exactly what's going to be happening. In this case, the note also reporting that there's no general asset routine, or report rather, for the year-end routine generated. That's why you need to have as part of your report group a before and an after report that you can view and verify. There are specific steps as well for those companies that are using analytical accounting. The process needs to be completed between fixed assets and before general ledger, and there are details for that within my year-end closing guide. I won't go through the detailed steps here. We don't have a lot of people using AA, but those steps are included in the documentation if you need that. And finally then we're going to get to the general ledger, the top of the pyramid. First and foremost, I need to make sure I have gone through all of those sub-ledger closings. So starting from the beginning, whether it was inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, analytical accounting, now up to the general ledger level. If I have any adjusting entries, including the journal entry that fixed assets created for me, or any other adjustments or accruals, those need to be posted at this point. I now go through the various reports that I want to create, my account list, In the setup for the fiscal periods, I can close the final fiscal periods. All of December can now get soft closed. If you choose to, there is some file maintenance work that can be done at this point. I can now verify that I have my GL settings correct for the coming year. I don't have any new accounts that have added that should be an asset and for some reason were marked to be on the P&L statement. That's what I need to verify that all of those values are set up correctly. Make my backup. Print the detailed reports, so trial balance, print my financial statements, verify that the new year has been set up in the fiscal period setup window, and then close the year. Close all the fiscal periods for the subledgers if I had not done that previously. And then if I need to, make any adjustments for budgets for the new year, make my final backup. And that has taken us to the end of our, end of our trail, the goal we're looking for, the year-end closing window itself. I'll specify what retained earnings account I want to use. If I have set up my system with a divisional setup, I can also specify to close to divisional retained earnings accounts. For the new year, do I want to start my journal entry numbers again at 1? Or do I want to let the existing series roll forward so that that is without any breaks? And then some details around cleaning up inactive accounts or unused segments. When I get everything ready to go, of course, then I can finally click that close year and we start the process off. So with that, let me switch back over into GP real quick. And we talked a little bit again about how to do those backups. So from the Dynamics GP button, go to Maintenance, come down to Backup. And when I click on the backup, again, it's going to ask me where do I want to store that backup. Do I want to do it local? In some instances, you will have the option of using Microsoft Azure storage. If you have already got that enabled, you can be doing, of course, off-site cloud-based storage for your database. In a multiple company environment, I'll need to select which company I want to work with. I'm going to use local storage, and once I'm ready to go, I create my backup. You might want to make a quick link or shortcut to this window because you are going to be spending a lot of time coming back and forth to doing those backups. Cancel back out of that. And then the last thing I want to spend a little time talking about is Microsoft released this document, and again, I'm going to be sending this document out to anybody who requests it. Just goes through, there are some specific changes that need to get highlighted for 2014. The changes were made in the following modules: U.S. payroll, Canadian payroll, the payables management, and the fixed assets module all have some slight changes to what has been historically done. So you're going to want to review the details on this before you proceed too far. No changes were made to inventory, receivables, a couple reminders to go through for analytical accounting and general ledger, but for those it's been the same steps and the same results all the way through. Again, for this year, 2014's year-end close, Microsoft is still providing version support for GP 2010, GP 2013, and GP 2015. Those updates are all inclusive, so everything will be there, all the service packs, etc. The dates, these have all been released now with the possible exception of the round 2 tax update. That's not come out yet. Everything else is available as part of your access through Customer Source. For anybody who's still on GP 2010, this is the last year that a year-end update is going to be made available from Microsoft. And that doesn't mean that you can't do year-end close going forward. It just means that Microsoft is no longer going to be providing updates to taxes, to payroll. Their documentation, guidance, and their support will no longer be provided after the cutoff dates that you see below. So tax updates will end the middle of October this year, and the extended support for the product itself is going to end on October 13th, 2020. So if you're still on GP 2010, there's no problems right now, but the horizon is starting to close. You need to look at upgrading to a more recent version. I won't go through all the changes that are listed in the document. Again, you'd be able to ask and get a copy of this. So no W-2 changes, for example, but there have been changes at the W-3 level. The updates, again, for the tax updates, those should now be available for download on Customer Source. FICA has updated their Social Security tax limit, and there are some state-by-state tax changes available as well. And again, a reminder, don't install the year-end wage file has been generated, and all the payroll for 2014 has been processed. So get that cleared out first. The availability of information or support for the Affordable Care Act. Microsoft is going to do 2 phases of this in terms of providing support for it. Phase 1 is included in this year-end close procedure. Phase 2 will be coming later in 2015. The year-end close starts the tracking. This is going to include the changes necessary at the database level to do the automatic ACA tracking that's required for calendar year 2015. This functionality is included in Dynamics GP 2013 and 2015. Microsoft is not making this functionality available, however, in GP 2010. If you have concerns or needs for tracking the Affordable Care Act requirements, a good motivator to get upgraded to either 2013 or 2015. And of course, to be able to do this, you need to be using the Human Resource Management modules inside GP. There are links included in this PowerPoint as well as in the other documentation we're going to send out that allows me to get information about these particular functionality as well as downloads. How do I get the tax updates, etc. Some important reminders: if you're using the Business Portal Human Resource Self-Service Suite, there is a hot fix that needs to be installed. There were some direct deposit table changes. There are some other changes supported. Links to important sites. There's information included about Canadian payroll. I don't see anybody on from Canada. If you need details about that, though, the links are going to be included. And then finally, the what's new pieces. In payables management, the year-end close update now includes changes for the 1099 interest form. They've added Box 10 and Box 11. Box 13 gets renamed to now be called Box 15 to hold the state tax withheld information. Important points to remember. You can now do 1099 editing prior to doing your year-end close. There's a utility that's available that allows me to change the individual transaction status, even change the status of the vendor, and we now have a 1096 summary form available. For fixed assets year-end close, luxury auto max depreciation amounts have been updated, and the fixed asset year-end report is now included as part of GP 2015. Analytical accounting, a couple reminders. There are knowledge base articles that you can download that have updated the year-end close procedures, as well as what's going to be impacted in the back end. At the general ledger level, in GP 2013 R2 and in GP 2015, there is a reverse historical year button in the year-end closing window. It's a new piece of functionality that was introduced in GP 2013 R2. Its purpose is not to unwind from a failed year-end close. It is to reverse a historical year that was closed successfully and now for some reason needs to be reopened. So it's a great piece of functionality to have. It certainly makes that process much easier, but it's not applicable for your year-end close. If you have a problem during the year-end close, The proper recovery is to restore from the most recent backup that you made. And this is why we go through all those different backups each step of the process in year-end close. That's my process for returning to a previous state. If you tried to use the reverse historical year at this point, I don't have a completed year-end close for 2014, and the reverse will not be able to accomplish it. It won't put me back to my starting point. There have also been some changes in terms of quality and performance issues that have been updated. There's a variety of fixes. These are all going to get downloaded as part of the year-end update. And again, I've got those additional resources with the links, whether I'm looking for where do I find the update for my specific version, where do I get my payroll tax updates. There's some really good feature information, and the year-end close blog series, as well as there's a checklist of year-end close standard procedures. You can download those and go through step by step and have that downloadable function. And the last thing I'll point out, going back to my GP 2013 system, if I go to my home page, if you have the Connect function set up on your home page, the #1 article on Connect right now is a direct link to the Dynamics community, which takes us through their blog series, all the different blog articles that they've released, so there's a lot more information available. You can get to that directly from that Connect function inside your GP homepage. So with that, let me go ahead and stop the recording, and I can then unmute all the phones and take any questions if anybody has any. So now let me pull up that final PowerPoint. And again, there's Jim's email address and my email address. If you'll send us a quick email requesting the year-end close documentation, be happy to send all those documents out to you.